Off the coast of Japan, something rises from the sea that looks like a warship. Gray, silent, bristling with towers. But it is not a ship. It is an island made almost entirely of concrete. A wall of crumbling towers packed onto a rock barely a quarter-mile long. Today it is completely empty. No one lives here. The windows are shattered, the staircases collapsed, the rooms open to the wind. It is one of the emptiest places you will ever see. What follows is based only on documented record. No blame, no defense, only what happened here. And that is what makes this place almost impossible to believe. Because just a few decades ago, this silent rock was the most crowded place on the entire planet. More than 5,000 people lived here, on an island smaller than most city blocks. They built a city on this rock, in the middle of the sea. And then one day, in a matter of weeks, every single person left. The doors were shut. The island was sealed off from the world for 35 years. This is the story of that island. How people built a miracle of concrete in the sea, and what it cost. A story of extraordinary prosperity, and of the hardship buried beneath it. This is Hashima, the place they called Battleship Island. The story begins with a small bare rock in the sea, off the coast of Nagasaki. For most of history, there was almost nothing here. Then, beneath the seabed, they found coal. In 1890, the Mitsubishi Company bought the island for a single purpose: to mine that coal. And this was no ordinary mine. The coal lay deep beneath the ocean floor, so they dug down and then out, under the sea itself. To house the workers, they had to make the island bigger. Over decades, they built seawalls around the rock and filled them in, expanding the island 6 times. The jagged reef was reshaped into a hard-edged rectangle, ringed by a towering concrete wall. When it was done, the island had a strange new shape, long, gray, and walled, with towers rising behind the seawall. From the sea, it looked exactly like a battleship. People began to call it Gunkanjima, Battleship Island. By the 1950s, Hashima was booming. Coal was the fuel of Japan's recovery after the war, and this tiny island was one of its richest sources. Workers came with their families, and the island filled, far beyond anything anyone had seen. In 1959, the numbers reached their peak: 5,259 people, living on 16 acres of rock. That is a population density of over 80,000 people per square kilometer, one of the highest ever recorded anywhere on Earth. Around 7 times denser than central Paris. To fit that many people, Hashima built upward. Back in 1916, it raised what is considered Japan's first large reinforced concrete apartment block, high-rise living, decades before it was common anywhere else in the country. But a city on a bare rock faces one problem above all: water. Hashima had no fresh water of its own. For years, every drop had to be carried in by boat. As the population swelled, that became impossible. So in 1957, they built Japan's first undersea water pipeline, running fresh water to the island along the ocean floor. Even then, the swimming pool and the miners' baths still ran on seawater. And this was not a grim labor camp. It was a real town. It had schools, a hospital, shops, a cinema, even a swimming pool. Families grew gardens on the rooftops, the only green on a rock of solid concrete. By the late 1950s, nearly every household on Hashima owned a television, at a time when a TV cost 1 to 2 months' wages in Japan. For an island in the middle of the sea, Hashima had almost everything the mainland did: 25 shops, a hospital, a cinema called the Showakan, pachinko parlors, mahjong halls, billiard rooms, even bars. A company store sold daily goods cheaper than on the mainland. Life here was cramped, but it was full. The island even had its own shrine, perched on the rock above the sea. Each year, the islanders held a festival, carrying a portable shrine on their shoulders through the narrow streets, with sumo and dances performed in the cinema hall. One year, after typhoons had battered the island and broken its spirit, they delayed the festival by a month, just to give the community something to smile about again. For the children who grew up here, Hashima was not a strange place at all. It was simply home, a whole world floating on the sea, where everything you needed was stacked within a few hundred feet. But everything on this island stood on one thing: the coal. And the coal came at a price. One man who grew up here remembered his father as the projectionist at the Showakan cinema. But when television arrived and the cinema closed, his father had no choice. He went down into the mine and became a coal miner, like almost every other father on the island. The children understood how hard the work below was. They were careful, he said, never to disturb their father's rest. The wealth of Hashima came from deep below the ocean. To reach the coal, miners rode elevators down through the rock, descending more than half a mile beneath the seabed, far below the waves. Down there, the conditions were brutal. The tunnels were narrow and searingly hot, thick with coal dust and the constant threat of gas. Cave-ins and accidents were a persistent danger. The men who worked these tunnels risked their lives with every shift. And there is a darker chapter, one that must be told honestly. Before and during the Second World War, Hashima's mines used forced labor. Large numbers of Korean workers and Chinese workers were brought to the island and made to work in these tunnels under harsh conditions. How many died here is a question without a settled answer. Estimates vary widely, from around 130 by one account to over 1,000 by another. The exact figures remain a subject of historical dispute between Japan and Korea to this day. What is not disputed is that people suffered and people died in the mines beneath this island. This history is why, decades later, the island became the center of an international dispute. When Japan sought to list Hashima as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2015, Korea objected over how this wartime forced labor would be acknowledged. The site was granted, but only after Japan agreed to recognize that full history. Hashima holds both of these truths at once. It was a marvel of human engineering and a place of real suffering. To tell its story honestly is to hold both in view. And in the 1960s, the thing that built it all began to disappear. In the 1960s, the world changed. Japan began to switch from coal to oil. One by one, the coal mines that had powered the country started to close, and the island that lived and breathed on coal had no reason to exist without it. On January 15, 1974, Mitsubishi announced that the Hashima mine would close. For the thousands of people who called this island home, it was over. There was no work, and on an island with nothing but the mine, no work meant no reason to stay. What happened next was astonishingly fast. Families packed what they could carry and boarded the ferry, group after group. In just over 3 months, the island emptied completely. By April 20th, 1974, the last resident stepped onto the boat, and Hashima fell silent. They left in such a hurry that they left much of their lives behind. Televisions still sat in the apartments. Bottles and bowls remained on the tables. On the walls of the school, writing was still left on the blackboards. A whole town, frozen at the moment its people walked out the door. For the children who grew up here, who played on these rooftops and watched the sea from these windows, Hashima would remain a home that no longer existed. A whole world gone. and now there was only the sound of the waves against the seawall. With no one left to maintain it, the island began to fall apart. Typhoons battered the coast year after year, tearing at the concrete. Rain and salt ate into the buildings. Floors collapsed. Walls crumbled. The sea slowly began to take the island back. For 35 years, no one was allowed to set foot here. Hashima was sealed off. Too dangerous, too forgotten. The most crowded place on Earth had become one of the most complete ghost towns ever made, left entirely to the wind and the sea. Then, in 2009, the doors opened again, not for residents, but for visitors. Tourists could finally board a ferry from Nagasaki and walk a narrow, secured path through the ruins. But they see only a fraction of the island. Almost every building is far too dangerous to enter, left exactly as the sea has broken it. And when the water is rough, the boats cannot land at all. For the first time in a generation, people stood on Hashima again, but only at its edge. In 2015, Hashima was recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, as part of the story of Japan's industrial rise, alongside the full history of those who suffered to build it. Its haunting silhouette had already reached the world in another way. It helped inspire the lair of a villain in a James Bond film. The island had become a symbol. Hashima is many things at once, a marvel of engineering, built on a bare rock in the sea, a home remembered with love by those who grew up there, and a place of real hardship and suffering which must never be forgotten. All of it is true. All of it is Hashima. It stands there still, a gray silhouette on the horizon, slowly returning to the sea. A reminder of how quickly the places we build can rise, and how quickly they can be left behind. If you want more places the world built and then abandoned, subscribe and we'll take you there.